Well, good afternoon. My name is Brian Steenbergen, and I invite you to take a break with history. All right, that was my attempt to imitate Bjorn Skepticum. I'm not sure how well that went. Um, good afternoon. I'm coming to you from my isolation ward here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I thought we could talk about this engraving that we have behind us here. Um, so this was actually one of the first pieces that I acquired in my collection, and I acquired it actually from the Abraham Lincoln Bookshop. And gives me an opportunity to call out the Abraham Lincoln Bookshop, and just to say, if you're ever starting a collection, especially in Lincoln and the Civil War related material, um, the advice of experts like those of Dan Weinberg and Bjorn Skaptason at the Abraham Lincoln Bookshop, those are the guys you need to be talking to. So this engraving is actually a printer's proof or an artist's proof of the first reading of the Emancipation Proclamation. It's signed in pencil by Franklin B. Carpenter and by Ritchie, who is the engraver, just signifying that they have agreed with this. Now, so this is the first reading of the Emancipation Proclamation, and you remember this happens on July 22, 1862. A little bit of the context. Things were not going well for the Union Army at that particular time. This was after the Battle of, or the Peninsula Campaign, which was not exactly a stunning success. About a month later here, we're going to be going after the Battle of Second Bull Run, another not great Union success. But Lincoln calls his cabinet together and he says, um, I'm not here to discuss this. I'm issuing this Emancipation Proclamation. I only want your input as far as the form and the content of it. So, but Seward wisely calls out, he says, we got to issue this with some sense of a Union victory. If we do it now, it's going to look like, some deathbed shriek. So, and Lincoln thinks that's a good idea. And so he puts it in the drawer and he waits until after the quote unquote Union victory at Antietam on September 22 is when he then issues the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, which is signed and becomes official on January 1, 1863. So what's interesting here about the way Carpenter arranges the cabinet here, from left to right, and on the left side here, we have Stanton and Chase, who are the more uh, radical Republicans. They are abolitionists. They want to free the slaves. Over on the right-hand side, we have Attorney General Bates and Postmaster General Blair, and they are more conservative. They are opposed to the extension of slavery, but not necessarily the abolition of slavery. A couple of the other cabinet members, the one with my favorite name, as far as I'm concerned, Secretary of the Interior over here, Caleb Blood Smith. Gotta love that middle name. And then next to him, Gideon Wells, Secretary of the Navy, whom Lincoln often refers to as the um, Father Neptune, which is a charming little commentary there as well. And of course, Seward sitting in the front with his hand on the table. What's also interesting, I think, is that Carpenter places Lincoln way over here on the left side of the picture, meaning he's more in favor of abolition than perhaps most people actually think. So um, that's an interesting commentary, I think, on at least on Carpenter's opinion on where Lincoln stood with respect to slavery. Now, there's also a key that was published. So there's a number of different symbols that are in this picture as well. And that was published along with this picture. And it was reproduced, or Harold Holzer has reproduced it in his book, the Lincoln Image. And it looks like that. I don't know how well you can read that necessarily, but so some of the imagery that are in this picture. Uh, Up here is a photograph of Simon Cameron, who was Lincoln's first Secretary of War. I've kind of a shady, corrupt kind of politician whom it was often said of he would not steal a hot stove, which I think is charming description. Um, Above the fireplace, apparently it was actually there, is a picture of Andrew Jackson. Um, but then also, so on the table here is the Constitution, parchment copy of the Constitution. The Congressional Globe is located over there. Um, this is a battlefield map. This is a map of slavery. And one thing that's interesting here, and this I'd like to get into my collection sometime, is a book by Whiting called The War Powers of the President. And then, kind of interestingly enough, also down on the floor over here is the New York Tribune. So, some interesting symbolism here that are in this picture. So a couple of the other things that I have in my collection. Well, uh, Carpenter was in the White House. He kept a diary, and from that diary, he used that to write this book here called 6 Months in the White House. And it's a wonderful story, contemporaneous accounts of encounters with Abraham Lincoln, and this has some wonderful stories about his interactions both with Carpenter and other things that Carpenter had witnessed. I recently acquired this book here entitled The Men in the Picture, and it is a whole commentary about, or The Picture and the Men, I guess is the actual title. It's all about the Emancipation Proclamation. And it starts out in the preface here. This rapidly written little book serves as a companion and key to Carpenter's great picture. So that's it. And then there's a nice frontis here with engraving of Francis B. Carpenter. And then also on here is that same key that was in Harold Holzer's book as well. One thing I just noticed that when I was looking at this here, I didn't even realize it, but it's actually has a book plate in here from the famous Lincoln historian Stephen Laurent, which is kind of a cool little piece to be able to have too. And then I have this little calling card of Frank Carpenter. It's written in pencil on the back. I can't make it all out, but it says something to somebody, W.B. Van Wyck, with the compliments of Frank B. Carpenter, January 7, 1895. I always find that kind of charming. He likes to be known as Frank, which is very unpretentious. So that's a few of the things from my collection related to Franklin B. Carpenter. And as far as we would like to give recommendations as far as things that you could be reading, we talked about a couple of them already. The Lincoln Image by Harold Holzer would be a wonderful book to read. And of course, the 6 Months in the White House by Frank Carpenter. That was a wonderful read. Maybe something that another more detailed description of the whole Emancipation Proclamation is Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation by Ellen Gelswell, an excellent read as well. So, thank you very much for taking a break with history. As always, we would love to have you like and share. You can follow me at Stories from the Lincoln Berry Store and on Facebook, Twitter, and on Instagram. And of course, don't forget to like and follow the Abraham Lincoln Bookshop. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon.